We are drawn to a great artist, not because he's anything like us, but because there'll never be anyone like him again. The human race won't need to do it twice, and won't be able to. The choice of painters for this series is personal, but it's more than personal, for each of the three artists marks a distinct stage in the story of what is real in European painting between the Renaissance and our own time. In Florence, early in the 15th century, this painter started work. Before Masaccio painted, no one knew how simple and how grand man's natural perception of mankind could be. Masaccio painted that natural seriousness which doesn't change at all in 5 centuries, painted it by the light of every day, and found it as noble as any ideal that man has imagined. There's something marvelous about the artists who die young. When Masaccio died at the age of 27, he left work that established a view of mankind which we share 500 years later. But more than that, he established for the first time that a view of human beings might be the heart of an artist's work. Not idealized, not styled, not even imagined, in no way out of the ordinary. Men and women as they appear, it might be in this street, observed in real life, the neighbors, people seen in the humdrum light of every day. Personally, I'm the limited kind of painter who works only from life, so I was destined to have a special devotion to the master who first identified the grandeur of art as a quality of the real world. Painters before Masaccio had never been serious like this about the actual look of people in the street. The boy to be nicknamed Masaccio was born in a little town called San Giovanni Valdarno. It's 30 miles up the valley of the Arno, cradled in protecting hills. The town was animated by a strong and continuous community life and a sense of the autonomy of secular power. By the time he was 21, Masaccio was in Florence. In the church of Santa Croce, 100 years earlier, Giotto was painting. Giotto was the greatest of illustrators, with an incomparable sense of the balance between the terrestrial story, with its tenderness and sorrow, and the divine purpose which runs across it. He knew that people are solid. He understood that light strikes one side of a figure rather than another. But he did not come down to detail. He did not accommodate the individual flesh. Giotto's discovery of this solid stood waiting for 100 years, schematic and rather empty, waiting for the supremely great man who would see the implications of the way we perceive one another. Those implications for a humane art were beyond the understanding of all the painters working in the century between. Between Giotto and Masaccio, in the waning Gothic world, the quality of an image was something to be gathered like flowers. The Gothic image was brought to Florence by Gentili da Fabriano, the painter favoured by the tycoons of Tuscany. Gentili's adoration of the Magi is a jewelled, embroidered pattern. The delicacy that Masaccio inherited from painters like Gentili gave him a responsiveness to the individual and the particular. And he was equipped to take up the tradition of Giotto which was waiting for him. When he was 21, the little village of San Giovanale, not far from his birthplace, commissioned his first altarpiece. For this quite simple place, he painted a picture that has a countrified straightforwardness. It comes like a breath of air into the fanciful, decorated Gothic world. The recession of the throne, though attenuated and slightly Gothic, has some of the new pictorial science of perspective. The saintly bishop looking out at us is unpretentious, timeless, natural. At San Giovanale, Masaccio already saw things with his unique steadiness and precision. He owed something of this to Gothic painting, and soon after he was collaborating with the most refined of all the Gothic painters, a fellow Florentine, Masolino. The Gothic presentation, which frames the group and forms the presiding figure of St. Anne, the work of Masolino, the older man, is slender and willowy. But the colour within the contour has a ruby richness. Under its aegis, in the heart of this glowing picture, something different appears. Compared with St. Anne, the Virgin and her Son are solid, serene to the point of stolidness. They're surely the work of the younger man, together with one, but only one, I think, of the angels. We recognize not only a new artist, but a new consistency of embodiment, a mood which is not only impassive, as Gothic is, but cool in the modern sense. These figures by Masaccio have the presence of a new age. Then the Carmelites, here in the city of Pisa, asked him to paint an altarpiece for their important church. The altarpiece is now broken up and scattered, but some panels survive. His picture of the Magi appreciates the sober stature of the kind of people that we know. A mother is a little bowed by the care that is due from her. The worshippers are not at all flamboyant or ostentatious. their waiting animals clustered together without much finery. Everyone is quietly occupied by the seriousness of the discovery. The men are wrapped in their cloaks and wrapped also in a new kind of representation, an attentiveness to the way the material falls and creases about the bulk of a body. The center panel of this altarpiece is the enthroned Madonna and Child. The freshness of Masaccio's vision is plain and clear beside a Madonna painted by Gentili. Gentili's image is as dainty as a lace doily. Masaccio's people have their natural bulk, their gravity, and a specific character. As well as individual shape, they have kindness, or glumness, or appetite. They carry it all quite prosaically, with a naturalness that goes to the heart. Whatever he owed to his Gothic elders, there's no sign of it in the Madonna and Child. The severe architectural detail banishes any decorativeness. There is austere grace in the block-like solidity. Masaccio was now a master of the new pictorial technology, perspective. The sides of the throne converge to convey a measurable space like a hollow cube. Within the space, the bulk of the figures was realized by means that were new. For Masaccio, light and shadow became the substance. Try to trace a photograph of the head of the Madonna, and you'll find hardly anything that you can describe as drawing. There's only the delicate dappling of light and dark. We are watching the beginning of the long process of inquiry into what is really seen, and the dawning of the idea that the real essence of painting is the tones, recording the angle at which a surface takes the light or ceases to take it and falls away into darkness. Just the tones in themselves, amorphous, intangible, no lines, no conventional frontier for the conception of head. Masaccio's style wasn't always calm. The Pisa altarpiece was crowned with a crucifixion of distraught intensity. Nothing like this had been painted in Italy since Giotto. It owes more to the kind of imagination that had been stirring north of the Alps. The mourning Madonna, shrouded in her voluminous blue cloak, recalls figures carved in burgundy. And the agonized Magdalene, with the inspired acid incongruity of golden hair and orange robe, and the grieving St. John, are like echoes of sculpture in Saxony and on the Rhine. There was an alternative to the impassive dignity of the figures studied in itself, monumental and unmoving. The northern alternative was to imagine a figure as if made vivid by its part in a sacred play. The Florentines were well aware of the dramatic option. They knew German sculpture and admired it. So Masaccio had a choice. The form he chose was classic and still. In Florence in the early 1400s, the new climate of thought was a realization that the sense of the arts could be the common human sense we live by. Masaccio was the youngest of the three pioneers of this modern temper. Brunelleschi found how to make the new architecture proportionate and graceful. Human in its measure, to match the humanity of its purpose in the foundling hospital of Florence. And he found, too, how to span the crossing of Florence Cathedral with the springing dome. The sculptor Donatello carved St. George for the Guild Church of Or San Michele. The isolated figure was studied as never before, direct from life. There is no action or evidence of purpose, no more illustration than is necessary to define a soldier's trade and satisfy the armourer's guild which commissioned him. There's an expression only of a certain readiness, a model's readiness to pose, rather than any preparedness to fight. Yet the realization is so authentic that it constitutes an undeniable presence. It makes a state of being imaginable. This is the first image, made since antiquity, that we feel to look deeply and indubitably like the everyday experience of a man, and the effect of the example on Masaccio is evident. The discovery of a modern style, with a positiveness that made it logically unassailable, was the discovery that if an image is enough like the posing model, it need be, perhaps can be, nothing else. It was a splendid, strenuous discovery, and it was made in a strenuous place. Florence was laying the foundations of a new and energetic art with its own rational beauty. Florentine art was to be the best. It was to be refined by rivalry between the talents of the place. In 1401, seeking doors to their great baptistry, the Florentines made their sculptors compete. Florentine art, under Ghiberti's leadership, generated an athletic sense of purpose, the momentum that sweeps through these reliefs on his first doors. A competition like that is a forcing house. Florence at the beginning of the 15th century was a proud, sharp city with a stake in a new kind of future. It was prosperous and powerful, not in the least beholden to the papacy, and stimulated to boundless confidence by holding off authoritarian Milan. It was democratic, with the guilds installed in the city government, and was making demands on art unheard of before, and out of reach of any lesser city. Masaccio responded to the spirit of the time as no other painter did. Until his death at the age of 27, he was engaged on ambitious schemes for 2 churches in Florence. In Santa Maria Novella, close to a pulpit designed by Brunelleschi, he painted the Trinity. This was a startlingly new idea, an altar picture as a culmination of the devotions in a church and an extension of real space. A complicated invention like this usually owes something to a patron, and there was an intellectual in the fraternity here, a friend of Brunelleschi, who may have contributed something to it. Of course, I'm always prepared to believe that a painter is the hero, and I think that this receding vault, which frames and crowns the divine persons, was imagined by the painter. It wasn't an architect who imagined this. It isn't sculpture. It's a view. And painters for 100 years, Piero della Francesca, Giovanni Bellini, Raphael, went on using Masaccio's idea. In conception, the Trinity is a painted tomb. and interred at the bottom of the picture, with a foreboding epitaph, is a corpse. High above it, the great arch, as credible as if it were actually built in stone, admits us to the shadowy space of an imaginary chapel, imagined as leading out of the real church. For the first time, a painted interior is shown with a light and atmosphere of its own, and perspective allows it to be represented as a convincing extension of the building in which we stand. It's the very first camera angle in art. We look up into the vaulted space beyond an altar, and there, in the shadows, are presences of overwhelming majesty. God the Father, with the dove of the Holy Ghost hovering with him outside earthly limitations, presents to us the crucifixion, the actual event of the atonement. And present at the event are St. John and the Virgin. She's a nun, not at all idealized or youthful. A step below, outside the chapel, living people stand on each side. They are the donors, a couple called Lenzi, a magistrate of humble stock, as we are told, with his sympathetically plebeian wife. Below them again, down another step, the painted altar tomb, which belongs to the real space, is separated only by another shallow step from the floor on which we stand. The inscription over it reminds us, once I was as you are now, one day you will be as I. So the altar tomb is a reminder of mortality, but a particular mortality. A burial at the foot of the crucifixion is always a reference to Adam, according to the legend, buried on Golgotha. The chapel houses the whole drama of Golgotha, and the reason for it. The record of mortality which faces us is also the fall of man. The central perspective is the clue to it all. It includes everything except the Almighty. Everything else is consistently seen. Only the Father is outside space. Would foreshortening have been profane? Compelled by the whole scheme of the perspective, our eyes move upward. Looking up along the axis, we follow a sequence from the fall to the atonement and the redemption. It's a new art. The meaning coincides with a discovery of how things are seen. The visual destination of the perspective is the very destination of the faith. At the summit of image and meaning, God the Father is not seen but imagined. The superb visual technology offers a metaphor. The dynamic direction of the perspective coincides with the dynamics of belief. As the eye returns, we pass in succession through stratified levels of existence in the faith, from the sublime metaphysical conception down through the divine, the saintly, the human, until we arrive back at our own destiny and the intimidating inscription. The Trinity was painted not long before Masaccio's own death in 1428. The vision of this picture is mature and all-embracing. Even a detail like the donor's ear, inelegantly but surely characteristically bent forward by his cap, unites quite naturally with the visionary Godhead. The Trinity is a very personal picture, imagining the subject like a secluded rite and inventing a poetic visual metaphor for the central mystery of the faith. Santa Maria Novella could make good use of painted theology. Across the Arno, for the Carmelites, Masaccio collaborated with Masolino in the Brancacci Chapel, and the city is now tending it with the greatest care. It was here, 500 years ago, that a man in shipping commissioned the frescoes in which Masaccio's vision of the ordinary culminated. He started with the first guilt of man and woman. It's an image of intimacy and grief that remains unforgettably immediate and poignant to this day. The personal sense which is gaining confidence here is the sense of being able to see and paint the body. The expulsion from paradise shows all the weight, physical and moral, of real flesh. In maturity, Masaccio had all of Donatello's confidence in the real, and he possessed as well the painterly faculty, the sense that was wholly new in the art of man. The self-conscious modesty of Eve was borrowed from the ancient ideal of Venus, but now the actuality of a woman is seen, embodied in light. Light includes everything. You can almost hear her agony. Masaccio painted life very much as we know it, fixed in its dignity and affliction by his compassionate realism. He is realistic about perception and about the nature of the painting that depends upon it. Look at quite a different expulsion by the great sculptor Jacopo della Quercia, carved about the same time. He took the opposite approach. Jacopo, you see, was presenting dramas of ideally modeled physiques. It's a different philosophy, an idea of descent from the divine made manifest in imaginary perfection. With Jacopo, we're already looking forward to the heroics of Michelangelo. We owe to the habit of idealization much of the excitement, the fantasy fulfillment, and the elegance of art. The realization of actuality is at least as precious. It is scarcer and has equipment for the real world. It's more dependable than this. That, at any rate, is the faith and hope of the realist, who appears in modern Western art and nowhere else in the whole history of man. Masaccio's bodies aren't ideal. The accidents of light and shadow fall uncomprehendingly across them, leaving untouched the pathetic pudginess of flesh. After the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, all the paintings in the Brancacci Chapel are about social life and its responsibilities, as Christ and his first followers had to reconsider them together. Vividly as never before, Masaccio relived the very beginning of the Christian debate. The great example of Masaccio's realism at its most impassive, objective, calculated, is the tribute money. Like everyone else, the community of the apostles had to pay tribute to the occupying power. In front of a wide prospect of the Valdarno with wintry trees, this was the first Italian picture to notice a season. Masaccio shows the various stories from the Gospels that dealt with an issue which promises never to lose its urgency as long as organized society survives, the tax problem. One of the stories about the problem and its solution is seen in the distance on the left, where St. Peter finds money miraculously provided from a fish. On the right, along a street, in the other story on the subject, Peter pays the tax collector, that which is Caesar's, on Christ's diplomatic, if sardonic, instruction. Between them, in the middle of the painting, St. Peter and the other apostles surround their master in the slanting light and seriously debate the problem. The head of Christ was left for Masolino to paint with his typical serenity. It's a man-god without vehemence, closing an era. The future lay with man, and whatever is divine in man, passions and perplexities and all. Secular life, human life, was painted by Masaccio with an original, almost uncomfortable earnestness. He could not or would not idealize. John, with his spellbound devotion, the grizzled vehemence of Simon Peter, the whole range from monolithic loyalty to honest puzzlement are seen as the solid humanity of a head had never been seen. They're all fixed, still and noble as statues carved by the low evening sunlight. Natural roundness becomes apparent when light flows across the form from side to side, when shadow collects beyond it, or fills the hollow of a temple, while the bony forehead glistens, when appearances weigh the gravity of things. The building, which stands for the urban scene in the tribute money, also establishes the space in which the company stands. And perspective has another value. A rectangular building remains rectangular in the perspective image, so it agrees with the shape of the picture, the room, and the building of which it forms a part. It agrees, in fact, with the rectangular world we have made. The plan of the chapel must have been due to Masaccio, and when Masolino conceived and almost finished a miracle of the saint in the conventional Gothic manner, Masaccio painted a setting that took it into the real world, a townscape with the common sense and alert curiosity of the new vision. Beside the altar, the series which Adam and Eve introduced culminates with episodes from the Acts of the Apostles about St. Peter's ministry, incidents in the real life of the first Christians. His theme concerned the community and common behavior. With Masaccio's new style, new subjects became imaginable. A style in which figures caught the light and cast shadows brought within the compass of painting a subject that Gothic art had failed with. It must have suggested to Masaccio or his patron the episode in Acts in which the sick, brought forth into the street on beds and couches that at least the shadow of Peter passing by might overshadow them, were healed, every one. Masaccio reacted with the most graphic image of affliction. The healed are shown in successive stages. Each one rises from the ground as the shadow passes. Painters never saw the human condition before. The patience and grotesqueness of suffering are dignified by the liquid fall of light and shadow. This picture reflects the moving moment when the collaboration between the two artists was at its closest. Masolino added to it a portrait of himself, with the two men on whom the new movement depended, the august, bearded Donatello, and Masaccio in the character of St. John, a questioning, exacting face of subtle intelligence. Nearby, the self-portrait which Masaccio included in an unfinished picture reveals in the same head a skeptical and pertinacious sense of purpose. That's how we like to think of him. The spiritual and the social state of man, the medical state too, are objective and visible. Being so, they are paintable. Nowhere else has a single painted space so transformed the prospects for the art that filled it. Everything that matters most to human sympathy is open to art. In St. Peter baptizing, nakedness is transfigured by Masaccio's sympathy for what is vulnerable, ignominious, but still noble in real physique. The boy hugging himself has always been praised for the lifelike portrayal of chivalry. The point is that the unheroic reality revealed something the classical ideal could not. Display would prejudice the true revelation. Actual fortitude is simple, mute. It tells more than rhetoric. These are all pictures of the common real that are also pictures of light and shadow as they reveal the human condition. The death of Ananias is the most searching of them. The subject of communal responsibility now discloses its painful essence, the economics of conscience. Unlike the question of taxation, its theme is one to inspire devotion. Ananias, the story tells, sold a possession and kept back half the price. But Peter said, Ananias, thou hast not lied unto men, but unto God. When Ananias heard these words, he fell down and died. The primitive communism of the new faith, with its remorseless requirements and terrible punishment, is an extraordinary subject for a picture. Painting seems to be thought of as itself a kind of ministry to ordinary people. The sense of community here had never been painted before. Nothing had been painted before with anything like the seriousness that the painters of the Brancacci chapels seem to have decided on. The modern style was a conscious decision to realize a subject in the terms in which actuality is seen. This child's buttocks press against his mother's forearm with exactly the abject, indomitable look that one knows. Masaccio's view of man had a natural rightness that was visual, social, moral, all at once. There is no separating the three dimensions of meaning. Their achievement in one short life of genius is one of the greatest things in art.